So recently, I was creating a series, creating a series relating to socialism and how in history it's always worked. And I've already released part 1 of that, you can watch it on my channel. I was going to make part 2 public, I'm going to upload it soon. I'm currently working on it, and it's taking me a bit of time. Some of it has to do with research, actually a lot of it comes down to just researching things, and gathering citations and all that, and bookmarking things. But for the meantime, I just couldn't resist making a response to this video by this guy, and it originally came about while researching libertarian socialism. Not because I don't know what it is, like a lot of people, but because I am a libertarian socialist, and I was just looking up things at random, and I came across this article, which led me to the video in question. Libertarian socialism is an oxymoron and a complete failure. Very harsh. Libertarian socialism was recently brought to my attention, the guy says. I have heard the term before, but never really researched it or understood it more, or understood more about it. In doing my research, I quickly discovered that while libertarian socialism may sound good on paper, in practice, it has to be full socialism for it to ever address the problems it proposes to solve. Well, libertarian socialism is full socialism. When you ask most socialists, they say that the end goal of socialism is to achieve communism, and communism, 99% of the time, is referred to as stateless. Now, of course, you can have state communism, but libertarian communism is what even state socialists theorized about and what they wanted as the final goal of all their socialist activities and their political campaigns. So, here we are, you claiming that libertarian socialism is a lesser socialism. I think it's more socialistic than state socialism, than authoritarian socialism. Not only because the state is a hierarchy, and as anarchists we're against hierarchy just in general, especially really unjustified, oppressive, widespread hierarchies such as capitalism and the state, but also because we're giving full control to the workers, who, control the means of production, and all that good jazz. So, I don't know what you mean. Are you implying it's not full socialism? Also, even though the term libertarian socialism doesn't come up as much as it should, not near as much, most socialists in the Western world are libertarians. They support the workers controlling the means of production, as opposed to any government. So it's just really weird. So Quentin goes on to talk about a lot of stuff. I'll get to the video, but I want to just talk about the article in question, which says some stuff outside of the video, which I will get into. One of the big things of libertarian socialism is how people are born unequal and how that is a big problem. Here is a good example of it. A libertarian socialist would argue that a society based on such huge disparities of wealth is unfree. If you wish to enter into employment, you choose first and take orders later, as with liberal democracy. Libertarian socialists believe in voluntary association in economic democracy. This will allow the individual to reach their full potential. So basically, libertarian socialists are not a fan of the property system of capitalism, where somebody can own a piece of land and claim ownership over those resources. Because those resources are scarce, libertarian socialists will argue that it shouldn't be owned and controlled by one owner, but rather some type of democratic ownership where it can be managed more fair or equal, whatever that means. Whatever that means, it means fair or equal, where one person cannot just privately own and hoard resources that are important to a community to survive and to also live comfortably. That is fair. It's unfair to just allow one person to take everything that belongs to a community, to the wider part of a society. So I don't know why you had to put quotation marks around fair or equal, but whatever, Quentin, let's keep reading your article. Let's first look at those terms, fair and equal. Libertarian socialists are big fans of equality. Well, so are socialists in general. I don't know why you're specifically talking about libertarian socialists here, but whatever. They will quickly point out how different people are born differently. Some people are born into monetarily rich families, while others are born into monetarily poor families. And they decide to take the side that is, it is better to not be monetarily poor, so therefore anyone born into a monetarily rich situation has an unfair advantage. This doesn't make logical sense. If it's not a poor person's fault that they are born poor, then it's not a rich person's fault they are born rich. If you don't hold a poor person being poor against them, then you can't rationally hold a rich person being rich, that is, being born rich, against them as well. You can't pick and choose which people should be treated that way. So that's the first big problem. And I would disagree with this. And the reason I would disagree very heavily with this is that a poor person born into, a poor family has no money to give away. Somebody who is rich, it's not their fault that they're rich, they're just born into an extremely rich family, can afford to give away a fair portion of the wealth. They can keep how much wealth is necessary for their comfort to live like everyone else, but they can't hoard. Of course, by law and by the extension of private property rights, they can, in an unequal and unfair society. So it's a different situation here. If you're born into a rich family, then you give to the needy, but not just the needy, the people that need it, the people that are born into poor families and can't make it out of poverty because they just can't find a career that will boost their revenue. There's only so many jobs in America, there's only so many jobs in Australia, there's only so many jobs in the world, and most of these jobs, in fact 62% of jobs in America, for example, can't even get you middle wage income. Okay, that's how bad it's gotten. These people will not rise to the top. It's not your fault. It's private owners who take your money, and it's also private owners who set terrible working conditions. So of course they're not going to give you good jobs. They want you to be unemployed. So you'll seek out the worst work possible, since you'll find that better than nothing. And that will put you in this position of working for the worst possible wages, the lowest, in the worst possible conditions. You do it because it's better than having no job. This is how capitalism benefits from unemployment, and how private schools and public schools benefit from not actually educating kids on what they need to be educated on, just so private businesses can make money off of people doing terrible jobs that nobody should do, and really jobs that don't even need to be done. Is there a lot of pointless jobs that have no reason to exist, have no justifiable legs to stand upon? Quinton follows it up with, but let's go further with it. Who determines what is poor and what is rich? Where do you draw the line? And I would say somebody making under, and I mean this in a global sense, $15 an hour is what I would consider below average. But whatever, he lists some stuff, $20,000, okay. It's kind of irrelevant. It's kind of irrelevant that we're making strict lines, alright? If you are born into a rich family, you know what rich is. You can compare yourself to the people in your neighborhood, to the people in your country, to the people in your state, and you can say, well, there are people that need my money that I'm not even really using. I mean, I own all this private property, but I don't even use it. So it's necessary, and it's also moral, that I give it away like any decent human being. What makes this right? Is it always this amount? Oh, let me guess, a democratic council will determine the right amount, and they will get it right, because they are smarter than you. No, the community, democratically, and I mean in a participational democracy, not a representative democracy, I mean when people come together to, through dialogue, make rightful decisions, the correct decisions, in a mutual non-hierarchical fashion. You don't need a hierarchy in this. This is simply because people will work out who gets what. But also, in a libertarian socialist society, you wouldn't have people land-grabbing property and resources to begin with. You would have people working in a non-hierarchical work environment and controlling their means of production, that means production overall, for themselves. So we don't really have an issue here. Who's going to abuse private property in order to get rich? You can't do that under libertarian socialism. Or at least the libertarian socialism I advocate for. And once they determine the right amount, they will force you to comply with this. Stop this, this is stupid. Yeah, see, here's the thing, right? This whole force stuff. Just because you use the word forced, and I guess it is technically forced, doesn't mean it's necessarily authoritarian. You can make it sound authoritarian, you can make anything sound authoritarian. This is just nonsense. I can force you to comply with property laws, private property laws. Does it make private property laws authoritarian? Well, they are to me, but they wouldn't be to you, despite the fact that I would still be using the term force. They will say something like, yeah, but all these rich people have an advantage in being able to more easily buy land, take over resources, and live an easier life than people born poor. You can't hold how someone was born against them. Yes, but I can hold somebody's actions against them. And it's not them being born rich or born poor or anything like that. If you're born with wealth, it's your duty, when you have the cognitive capacity to understand emotions and the devaluing of money, to give away that money at a certain point. And if you make a really stable income, to give part of that income to people who need it. We live in capitalism, we live in extreme times of inequality. So it's only necessary, in my view, and in any decent person's view, I believe. Then it will come to something like, yeah, sure, it's not their fault, but society as a whole would be better if they didn't have the ability to buy up all the resources and have this advantage. It's exploitative to poor people. That's completely true. pretty much anyone agrees with that. You know, you don't even need to be a socialist in order to agree with that. You be fucking Bernie Sanders and agree with that. It's not exclusive to socialists. Everyone should have an equal shot at property, they will say. Yeah, I mean, yes. Why would you argue against that? Yeah, they should. So rich people and poor people should both be treated with the same rules for conditions they have no bearing over. But who really cares about this? Where libertarian socialists really take a turn for the worst is when you look into how this will actually happen. So how do libertarian socialists solve this problem? Oh, let me guess, you're going to talk about the non-aggression principle, not understanding how consent works or something like that. I presume this is the case. The practicality of libertarian socialists. The real question is this: how do you make society, land, or property equal for everyone? True central planning, of course, but libertarian socialists don't call it central planning or government. Well, it's not a government, it's a community which control a select territory. So let's say you work in a commune, right? Alright, that's your work. You control the means of production. You own your own workplace. It's a cooperative. And so, just like workplace democracy, it's spread out across the commune. This is called participatory democracy. And participatory democracy is where you make decisions in a participational manner, obviously. So you adjust prices this way. And you just make everything fair for everyone. You talk, you have dialogue, you have debate. And of course, a commune would be anywhere from 2 to 150 people in order to go along the lines of trust economics to maximize trust between members of a commune. And so people can work things out without the use of force or hierarchy or the state. Okay, so in order to have property done fairly, they magically create democratic processes where the members collectively decide the best way to manage resources. Do you already see where this is going? That's what we already do with government. But at least with government, we still do allow some private control for people to take private ownership and have their own vested self-interest to make something the best it can be. No, the libertarian socialists will say, this isn't governmental socialism. Well, it is socialism. Do you think socialist in libertarian socialist means nothing? This is an equalization of resources between different regions who blah blah blah. These are all words saying the same thing. No, they're not. Because it's not a hierarchy. See, if the state were to redistribute wealth, or in the case of maybe the Soviet Union, for instance, let's just use the Soviet Union, or even Mao's China, yeah, you do ban certain kinds of private property. Not all private property, but you do ban certain kinds. So somebody who is a wealthy kulak or whatever, or a landlord, you know, they're going to have to step down from their hierarchical authoritarian position. But this is their holding of that position. They're the ones already committing the crime, not libertarian socialists or the state, or whatever. The second problem leads to libertarian socialists is exactly the core principle which they are trying to solve. Unless you really make everything equal, then there is going to be inequality under libertarian socialism. Based off of where people are born, they may or may not be part of a better democratic group, making better use of their land. But, as a territory, the communes will interact with one another, and try to make overall decisions based upon their grooves. So this wouldn't be a problem. This is you over-exaggerating the potential flaws libertarian socialism could have, but won't. Rather than calling it individually held, they call it a group held, and then they face the exact same inequality aspects at the group level, rather than the individual level. Calling something a democratic group instead of an individual makes no difference in ownership or production decision. Okay, so would most people in capitalism, where we live under the state, where we live with, private property, private ownership over the means of production, would people, because most people agree with certain laws, right? Let's say marijuana laws, right? Let's say we want to make weed illegal, right? That's not the case. It's the case in certain states, certain countries, but that's kind of it. Worldwide, that's not the case. I mean, say in America, where most people agree with this, is weed illegal in most places? No, it isn't. And so the individual, which is, in this case, Donald Trump, or whoever who has ever governed the United States, the Republican Party aren't going to legalize it. The Democratic Party aren't. They're both capitalist imperialists at the end of the day. Just two different sides of the same ideological coin. So this is different. If the people controlled things democratically, and I'm talking about a participational democracy, or even a direct democracy in some cases, even that's better than representative democracy, which you really shouldn't call democracy. I think the term representative dictatorship is a lot better, because it quite literally is a dictatorship. You just vote for dictators. Rather than facing inequality with individuals, they now face it with democratic groups. Except there won't be any inequality. Unless you want to talk about meritocratic socialism, where private property still exists, but not in the case of privatizing human beings. No, workers are still in charge of their own labor, and there's still, there's no hierarchy within that workplace. But there is a hierarchy between rich and poor. I don't think, because through the abolishment of certain kinds of private property, say, for instance, unoccupied houses, which is something pretty much everyone, whether a socialist or not, agrees shouldn't exist. I mean, at least not exist in the context of somebody's not using it. It shouldn't be allowed for others. It should be allowed for others. They agree that's the case. But in terms of this whole inequality thing, without the abuse of certain kinds of private property, say for instance I make an album, for example, the people printing these albums, the people manufacturing them, they get paid for their factory work, right? I get paid for the amount of effort I put in, or what's reasonable, what the community democratically decide is right for my effort. So, I think anybody who doesn't try, then in this society, I suppose they're just going to be poor, but I don't think libertarian socialists who would already advocate for meritocratic socialism would have a problem with that, because they just blame it on the individual. The individuals, that is, that don't work, or work very little, or work very poorly. But of course, in this society, in a true libertarian socialist society, the one I advocate for, we should just give people basic human rights. It's a bit like social democracy. You get healthcare, you get vaccines, heating, a roof over your head, walls around you, you get shelter, good food, a lot of food, water, these sort of things, clothes. We don't need to privatize anything, really. I mean, we can transition to communism anyway, specifically anarcho-communism. But he goes on, alright, Quentin goes on. But here's another problem. What if I want to opt out? What if I know how to use land better than the economic democracy that is currently using it like a bunch of hacks? Then what? I am back to our current state system. No, because if you see other people using land like a bunch of hacks, you can just tell them, to not use it like a bunch of hacks. Because it's a fucking democracy where you talk these things out, mate. I mean, look at our government, right? They're operating like a bunch of hacks. I mean, from whatever political spectrum you stand on, even if you're a fucking fascist. So, what are you gonna do about it? You can't just go up to them and tell them you're a bunch of hacks. They're not gonna change. In a commune, however, in a participational democracy, they fucking can. And they'll fucking listen. For their own benefit and your benefit. There are other economically inviable, irrational beliefs of libertarian socialists too, like how profit is exploitative of employees. Yes, it fucking is. Can you please explain to me how stealing people's labor value, extracting their labor value, taking their surplus value is not exploitation? Or putting them in terrible working conditions, very hazardous, very pollutive, in fact, with workplace injuries skyrocketing. It's just out of control. Terribly unsafe environments where you can die a lot of the time or get really injured. And apparently it's not exploitative, but whatever. Libertarian socialism is so bad that it's not even fun to write against online. So I'm done. It's socialism phrased as something else, except it's not. Same crap, different name. Okay, so this is a very interesting individual. We'll get to the video soon, but I want to show you something. Look at the title of these articles, these posts. Wealth inequality is really wealth equality. You're wrong, Hitler was a great guy. Poor people choose to be poor. Whites ended slavery. Holy shit. Holy fuck. Poor people should not be allowed to vote. Poor people are addicted to being poor. And transgender people are missing the spiritual component, whatever that means. Okay, so I've discovered an absolute lunatic on the internet, which is quite common. I don't even know why I'm acting surprised. That's just kind of normal, honestly. Nothing really surprising, but I mean, just the titles are fucking glorious. But anyway, let's get right into the video. So he starts the video off by saying,
okay, so first let's define things, right? So let's define libertarian socialism. This is taken from Wikipedia. And it says, libertarian socialism sometimes called social anarchism, left libertarianism, and socialist libertarianism, is a group of anti-authoritarian political philosophies inside the socialist movement that rejects socialism as centralized state ownership and control of the economy, as well as the state itself. It criticizes wage-labor relationships within the workplace, instead emphasizing workers' self-management of the workplace, and decentralized structures of political organization, asserting that a society based on freedom and justice can be achieved through abolishing authoritarian institutions that control certain means of production and subordinate the majority to an owning class or political and economic elite. Not done. Libertarian socialists advocate for decentralized structures based on direct democracy and federal or confederal associations such as libertarian municipalism, citizen assemblies, trade unions, and workers' councils.
And here, he actually manages to correctly define libertarian socialism, which is more than I can say for some individuals. In fact, quite impressive, seeing the article I just read out wasn't very impressive itself. He then goes on to say, and so far so good, I just want to point out.
You have kind of the anti-state portion of it, which would be kind of the libertarian part, I guess, right? So it's anti-state, anti-authoritarian, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like anarchist in that way. You have the wage-labor relationships within the workplace, so kind of the wage slavery aspect where, you know, they're not happy about that kind of thing. And then what else? Decentralized control, direct democracy, that kind of thing. So kind of more a grassroots, smaller type of way to choose how to manage things rather than some huge centralized authoritarian government type thing, right? So that's kind of the social aspect, is the direct democracy and kind of that. I know they say most people get the word socialism mixed up by meaning state, and I'd agree that a lot of people do get that mixed up. Socialism over free markets, that's kind of the big difference. And they want to do socialism in a non-governmental way, in a more voluntary type way, which is respectable, but it's also an oxymoron. Because socialism, by the way it actually works, takes away your freedom. So if you want to have maximum freedom, which is a libertarian type thing, right? You want to have liberty, free will, choice. You can't have that with socialism, or at least you can't have it to the degree that you can with something else like a free market. So if you're going to have socialism, that requires somebody else to coerce another person. And when you coerce somebody, you're taking away their choices or their free will. You're acting on them without them allowing you into it. So a free market system does not tell other people that they need to do something, or they need to give you their resources, or they're managing something incorrectly. A socialist system does do that, and that's why it's an oxymoron to call it libertarian socialism, because you can't have true libertarianism or free will or liberty when you have socialism.
Right. So the gist of Quentin's argument is that you can't really have freedom, a free society where people are forced to give up resources. But this is implying that capitalism is free, and it's completely neglecting the principles of the non-aggression principle. That is a concept originally developed by left libertarians, and eventually, as things, turn to be this way, ideologically appropriated by right-wing hacks who don't understand it. Anything about it, actually. Quite the opposite, that they pretty much butchered it. They butchered the original idea of the non-aggression principle. So, in order to have true freedom, right, you can't infringe upon other people's freedom. So, for instance, if my society were to be free, people wouldn't be allowed to own slaves. People wouldn't be allowed to freely murder people, because rules are naturally forming. Rulers are not, but rules are. Rules originate organically, because in any social atmosphere, people will set their own standards for good and bad behavior. So in this society, if I allowed people to murder people, thus I would have to take away the freedom of the victims to self-defense. So would I ban people defending themselves from violence, from murder, genocide, rape, theft? Would I do that? Would I do any of that stuff? Well, no, because then I would be infringing upon their freedom, and it's their freedom to self-defense. So I outlaw certain activities. One of these activities is slavery. Another is murder, bad things, arson, vandalism. That is vandalism against public property, not private property. I couldn't care if private property got vandalized in a capitalist society. But anyway, you get the idea. There has to be some rules in order to actually maintain full liberty and full freedom. So the non-aggression principle states that you can do whatever you want as long as it only harms you and nobody else. You cannot infringe upon anybody else's life, their rights, their liberty, and their socialized property. So, when it comes down to not hurting people, hoarding items, in this case private property, goods and services, is a form of harming other people, because you're not allowing people to be equal, which is the default state of nature. Egalitarianism, being equal, equality, all that good stuff. And so, by hoarding private property, by privatizing items, you're not only allowing people to, say in the case of food, starve, say in the case of clothes, be naked or be cold or wear dirty clothes because they don't have enough clothes. You already have, see the thing is you already have the property you need that suffices for you. You already have everything you need because there will be enough for the entire community to enjoy. But because of your selfishness, because of your hoarding of private property, which is why I'm against private property, it should be personal property and collectively owned property, you're essentially saying it's somebody who's infringing upon your rights to take what is rightfully theirs. When you isolate a piece of property from the wider community and claim it as your own and only as your own, only you can access it and nobody else, it does not belong to anyone but you're the one committing theft. You're stealing, thus violating the non-aggression principle. And thus, in a capitalist society, you can have true freedom. Let's say, for hypothetical instance, there's an abandoned settlement. It's an unoccupied household. Nobody's using it, but it is privately owned by an individual who already has a house that they do use, and they like their house. They like their house more than the abandoned one that they just keep lying around. Somebody who has no shelter decides to enter that house. Then the private owner says, no, stop, this is my house because I privately own it as my, private property. That's what happens in a capitalist society. And then the person trying to enter the house says, well, no, it's my freedom to enter a house. I'm not violating your freedom. You're violating my freedom to do something that harms nobody. You see where I'm going with this? So, you have a very messed up idea of how freedom works. Freedom means to access what nobody is using. Freedom means to partake in things that do not harm anyone, but the user partaking in them. And of course, it's not even harming anybody to enter a house. It's actually stopping them from dying from, the cold and living on the streets or in bushes uncomfortably. They actually have a roof over their head now. So there you go. Libertarian socialism is not an oxymoron. It's a natural state of reality. It's a natural state of human beings. We've existed for most of society, and by society I mean existence in fact, as stateless. We weren't governed by states, but also as socialist. We weren't ruled by masters, by private owners, and we were free because we shared property, we borrowed property. It was collective property. And when you collectivize property, you're allowing more people the freedom, the access, to use that property. While you privatize property, it does the exact opposite.
So there's two main kind of points to libertarian socialism. The wage slavery piece, right? And then you have kind of the equality and management of resources piece. And it's kind of similar type things. But let's talk about wage slavery, right? So libertarian socialists are very upset about the way that people can make a profit and kind of, they say, exploit workers, right? They liken a lot of people working for a company to that relationship of a slave person, where the corporation basically somehow magically got put in that position to where they can hire people, and now they're able to exploit these people because these people who work at this, say, factory or whatever, they are unable to, they're basically being used by this person, this capitalist, who magically got the factory and is paying them. So for whatever reason, these people are unable to start their own factory because, fill in the blank, there's no reason why. They could start their own factory, but they don't. They'd rather complain to the person who did start the factory, who did take the risk, who did get, whatever reason any business owner goes through when starting a company, it's going to be hard and challenging, which is why most people don't do it. And then the people who don't do it and then work for them, who complain to them saying that they're treating them unfairly, when they're voluntarily choosing to work there, it's a pretty absurd way to look at it. And that is what libertarian socialists do. That is what socialists do. And that is why it's a complete failure.
In order to start my own cooperative, and I say cooperative in a successful sense, I have to get my hands on some good quality equipment. You know, the resources in order to start, say, a nursery. So, I have to build a nursery. I have to gather together the bits and pieces to put it together so that people can be invited over, they can just wander on in and work there in a cooperative, non-hierarchical, mutual fashion, right? It's cooperativism in its finest form. It's where there is no boss, and people are paid their full labor, the full value of their labor value. Nobody's taking their surplus value at all. Nobody's setting terrible working conditions because they set their own conditions. Nobody's bossing them around. Instead, in a mutual fashion, recommending how to do certain tasks better. That's because they're there to help one another. The team members, the workers, in a certain sector. In this case, say, the workplace of a nursery. In order to build this nursery, I need to get the equipment, which costs money. Because in this society, in capitalism which we live under, these things are privatized. Equipment. The items I need to build the nursery are privatized. And so then I have to go to shops and I have to buy them. Where do I get the money? Well, I could take out a private loan from a bank, but seeing I'm using it to start a cooperative and not a, privately owned company, I don't quite think I'll, get the loan. Also, even if there was no ideological agenda behind the banks in regards to capitalism and in regards to their hatred of cooperatives, I likely wouldn't have enough money to pay them back. And the reason for this is that because I am one individual, I would have to extract my workers' labor value, their surplus value, take that, pocket that, and, deprive them of their wages in order to pay things back, in order to pay, the amount of loan money I took from the banks. And this is what private businesses do originally until eventually they paid off that debt, and then they just continued to make money. Probably making more money than the amount of money that they took from the bank in the first week or so, depending on how big your business is. If you get hundreds to thousands of people to join your privately owned business, of course you're going to be successful. Not your workers, not your wage laborers, you are. That's the issue. So I would have to work for a boss in order to get the money, to get the equipment, to start a cooperative. Do you see the issue here, right? Practicing libertarian socialism in a capitalist society is near impossible. That is, unless you sell yourself out to capitalism, which is not voluntary, because I would automatically, in a decent society, have the option to immediately start work in a cooperative fashion with people who do not want to be governed by bosses. You also have to take into account the amount of entrepreneurs who have failed in the market, in the private market. You have people competing that, even though their products might not be the best, their business might not be the best, the greatest out there, it is serviceable from an overview perspective. So things like Amazon, a site like Amazon, a business that is privately owned, has become so popular and successful, it doesn't mean it's the best. There are heaps of online retail sites that are exactly like it. But it just got popular because it was prevalent amongst people who started buying them. And well, it's serviceable, it's not particularly terrible. So there you go, Amazon took off. Every other online retailer pretty much just died. It just faded away. So I would presume less than 100 business owners, people who go on to become private owners, people who are self-employed but have other people working for them, their employees, are actually successful. Less than 1 in 100, less than 1 in 1,000, when we really consider how much wealth is concentrated into the hands of so few. That's what we consider really, properly, legit successful. At least by the standards of capitalism, and what you would expect your private owner to make who's part of the 0.1% of the population. Under libertarian socialism, however, we would, through mutual aid, work towards putting money into equipment that works for the community. So we can work for the better to help our community, to serve our communities, to help our communes out. It wouldn't be who could afford this equipment, who could afford this settlement. It would be because work needs to be done, and we're the workers of the world united, and because we control the means of production for ourselves, and not private owners, and not the state, we're able to collectively set things up together. And that is a society funding public workplaces for the people, because the means of production is controlled by the people. If somebody wanted to be an entrepreneur, if somebody wanted to be a private owner, they can do it outside of the communes, outside of the territory. But if it occurs within the communes, then it's depriving resources from those who need it. It's also creating an oppressive hierarchy in which one person has more power, authority, than their fellow man and woman. That's my issue. So that's all of his video I wanted to respond to. I know his full video is 26 minutes long, but he just says the typical thing you would expect a capitalist to say, you know? To kind of just brush things off. I really don't care to respond to these statements because I've heard them over and over again, and I find them quite boring, actually. So I'm going to leave on a note, which is that, well, there's two notes actually. This person in particular, Quentin, does understand basic economics. I think his defense of capitalism and his rejection of libertarian socialism, as he hasn't actually made a direct argument against what's wrong with workers' self-management. I haven't seen one anyway. I just don't agree with his assessments, is all. So you could say he's more moderate than most capitalists, most neoliberals. You know, perhaps he is. I'm not going to deny that. Even though his articles, the way they're titled is absolutely fucking atrocious, but, yeah, nonetheless. The other note I want to end on is that you don't need a state to achieve socialism. You don't need a state at all. And this is the thing with hierarchy. Hierarchies of any kind, for that matter. A non-hierarchical society is the best society one could possibly aim for. It sounds like a very utopian goal, but it's not impossible. It's something we all aspire to have: full unity and freedom over our lives. Not for some hierarchical entity, some authority with power, ranked higher than you, to tell you how to live your life, to force you to live your life the way they want you to. You see, equality is the default of nature, as I've said before, and hierarchy is unnatural, all of them. And that's why they need to be dismantled. Once we can achieve an anarchist society, an anarchist paradise, with these beliefs of anarchism, with these beliefs of libertarian socialism, we're able to finally let go of all the pain the state has caused us, subjecting us not only to the horrors of capitalism, but to the horrors of imperialism, colonialism, patriarchy, racial supremacy, and, well, any hierarchy that is terrible. So that said, I'm gonna end the video here. I hope you enjoyed.